Welcome to Wisconsin in Focus. I'm J.D. Davidson. The largest, most costly, and most attended university in the University of Wisconsin system could end up all on its own. At least that's a thought from a committee designed to look at the future of the system. Joining us today is Ben Yount, Wisconsin contributor for the Center Square. And Ben, tell us more about this committee and what went into what seems like could be a pretty big step.
Yeah, this would be the biggest step since 1973 when they created the UW system. This is the Legislative Study Committee for the Future of the University of Wisconsin system. Nice and rolls off the tongue, short little phrase that we get to use. And it is exactly what they say they are, that this is a committee that's looking towards the future. Now, that it is a legislative study committee gives it a little bit of a difference. It's not like a regular state house committee. This is not the Assembly Committee on Campaigns and Elections. This is not the Senate Committee on Higher Education. This has people who aren't lawmakers on it. In fact, I think there are like 16 different members. And this is a process that has been used by the legislature to skip hearings, in a sense, right? You know how this works at a typical state Capitol committee. There's a piece of legislation, AB 317, whatever that would be. And there's the committee of lawmakers. And so the people who are introducing this legislation, they come, they sit, they explain it. Then legislators say, thank you. Have any questions? They ask them there. If not, next person up. And then you have the advocates testify and you have the opponents testify. And at the end of the day, they vote and the legislation either passes committee and heads to a vote in the full legislature or it dies. This is different because the goal here is not to pass a piece of legislation. The goal here is to come up with recommendations that they can then forward to lawmakers that maybe sometime next year, maybe the year after, could become legislation, could become something for the legislature or the governor to deal with. So this is different in terms of both process and outcome. And so the idea of spinning off UW-Madison is not just thrown up on the wall, sort of like spaghetti to see if it's done, but just because they've suggested it doesn't mean it's going to happen. But it is a very, very interesting idea that the central question, and that this is what remains unanswered, is how much on its own is it going to be?
I like the idea of the committee, and I think it's always valuable to spend time to look at every kind of massive operation that you have and evaluate pros and cons of everything. And I also think I do think I'm not a lawmaker and I don't create massive budgets like this, but I think it has to be valuable to try to understand how much money this school costs compared to the rest of the system. I mean, if just to use easy numbers, if it's $100 for the entire University of Wisconsin system to exist each year, is 99 of that going to the University of Wisconsin, or is 40 of that going to the University of Wisconsin? I think that's important information to know to be able to make decisions with.
In reality, the UW's entire budget, all 13 four-year campuses and however many remaining two-year campuses, it's about $7.5 billion. $4.5 billion is UW-Madison. Madison is the most successful campus. And for as many times as I have criticized the university in the past, and tomorrow we'll be filing a story about UW-Madison's rank in the latest free speech campus index. It's not very good. But for as critical as people have been of the University of Wisconsin-Madison, it is an elite public university. It is both desirable in terms of students want to go there. They have to turn people away. It is a top-tier research institution, an R1 research institution is the way that it is called. It is one of the best public universities in the entire Midwest. When you look at the Big Ten, I think the comparison is perhaps Michigan is the only other school that is academically as excellent as the University of Wisconsin. Now, our football team's not as good, but then again, we don't have Connor Stallions out there helping us out.
Sure.
But UW-Madison is an excellent school, and it will survive well into the future no matter what else happens. And that's kind of the point here. This committee said, look, UW-Madison has UW-Madison problems. They've got to worry about getting new engineering buildings because they need that not only to educate new engineers, but the University of Wisconsin is a research institute. They need to have the facilities to continue top tier research. That's not a problem at UW Parkside. Almost every other university in the system is either losing students or is flat. The day-to-day operation issues, what do they need to do at Madison to manage 50,000 students is vastly different as to what they need to do at Oshkosh to manage a fraction of that. And so the idea is if you allow UW-Madison to be on its own and then have the system represent all of the other schools, then the system can benefit by paying better attention to the other schools, by coming up with a plan that applies equally. Because again, remember, it's government, got to have equal rules for everybody. And it's easier when those equal rules are among peer institutions. It's really tough to say, all right, we're going to require that 75% of your kids be Wisconsin kids. Well, it doesn't really work at Madison, where, just over half of the kids are from out of state and many of them are international, but that's because you've got top flight kids coming in. And so the question is just how much on their own would UW-Madison be? What would the state support be? Would Madison be given the ability to borrow money? That's a huge question because right now, Madison doesn't have the ability to take on debt to build buildings. Once you do that, UW-Madison brings money in through tuition and through federal grants and even through state support. But it's one thing when you've got a credit card and you've got the job to pay it off. It's another thing when your kid has the credit card and they don't have the job to pay it off.
Yeah.
And so these are some of the questions. Now, you can make the argument either way. UW's president, Jay Rothman, told the paper in Milwaukee, no, we are better together. Jennifer Mnuchin, the chancellor at the campus in Madison, said, no, we are better together. Democratic lawmakers, Chris Larson, who's on the committee, said he sees this as a plan to sort of divide and conquer the university. So he's a no as well. And just one more point, Scott Walker, the former Republican, made this offer back in 2011. He said, perhaps we should spin UW-Madison off. That way it can be on its own and we can focus on growing the rest of the system. There was some support at that time, but not enough. So this is not a completely new idea. It's going to be a difficult one to get past because universities don't like things that change the status quo, and this would be a massive change to the status quo.
I do hope this is not something that just dies. I feel like it's worth discussion. I feel like it's worth studying, and hopefully this conversation will continue. Ben, thanks for joining us today. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com.